What was the biggest scandal in your small town? College professor was found tied to a tree and burned months after he disappeared. Police ruled it a suicide. Suicide? I'm still not sure why they called it a suicide. Everyone knows there's no way it could be that. I recently heard that a documentary was made about it. Not sure where to locate it because it was some obscure group that made it. A few members of a scummy local family broke into a bar, stole money, beer and peanuts. When they went to leave, realized there was a drunk patron sleeping out back on a picnic table. They, thinking he was a potential witness, bashed his head in with a hammer, threw his body into the back of their truck, drove the truck through the old railroad trail and dumped the body in a swamp. They were caught almost immediately because there was a trail of blood and their truck was covered in DNA. All over some cash and beer. And if he was sleeping they could have just fucking left him alone, but I guess you never know if he's just faking. Scumbags either way. Or better, stick something from the till in his pocket and leave a bunch of empties around him. They'll think the drunk did it. Missed opportunity here. In 2000, a girl's body was found on the steps of the local middle school. The officer that arrived at the scene was a rookie officer. Since he was the first in the scene, the police department made him in charge of the case. The case was massively botched. The murder had shocked the community, and a lot of people were talking. Several years later, the police marked it as a cold case. A local woman was doing her own detective work. She reached out to a journalist from the UK. The journalist flew to meet the woman and investigate the murder and missteps by the police. They uncovered a massive cover-up. The local police department was hostile towards the journalist and local, to the point that the state FBI branch had to get involved to protect the investigation. Due to the police department's terrorizing behavior, they ended up getting investigated by the FBI. Apparently they knew who had committed the crime. A local drug dealer, who was cozy with the police. He eventually was arrested and sent to prison for life. The police department got a slap on the wrist. The journalist went back to the UK and the local woman moved to a nearby city. There was an anesthetist, who worked at our local hospital and another hospital in a different town. He was rather well known among other doctors and known to be good at what he was doing. He only had a small problem with being addicted to painkillers and anesthetics. So to feed his addiction without getting caught, he shot up part of his patient's drugs before injecting the same needle into his patient. Thus went unnoticed until it was discovered that over 60 of his patients got infected with hepatitis, and that he was the source for it. He was fired and his license revoked as far as I know. But the hospital's image still suffered quite a bit. Not much of a scandal, but more of a tragic event. In my small cow town, there was a missing little girl that was found in a suitcase that was floating in a water canal. The culprit turned out to be her neighbor, who also had a daughter the little girl would play with. The entire city was shocked as it hit really close to home. Remember that ALS Ice Bucket Challenge thing? There was a bit of an incident in my small town where two high school seniors pranked a mentally disabled student by asking him to participate in the Ice Bucket Challenge, but instead dumped a bucket full of tobacco, spit, human waste, etc. onto him. Needless to say, there was some outrage, and the two seniors were eventually arrested. I only heard about the case through the grapevine, but it was a pretty big deal at the time. I thought their sentence was very light when I heard it. They accepted a plea deal for straight probation for a short duration. The only caveat was that they'd have to voluntarily receive a similar treatment that they subjected the disabled student to at a local farm. I was surprised how common, unusual, sentences are. When I looked into it, there are dozens of stories about them happening in plea deals, and those are just the ones that made the news. Again, I thought the sentence was super light. Surely they'd just laugh it off, wipe it off, and shower afterwards. But then, I was shown a video of it at one point, not sure how the video got leaked, and I was rather disturbed, but also somewhat happy, to find that I was mistaken. It was awful. I only saw one of them, in one of those inmate restraint chairs, on the farm, and I thought it'd just be a little manure poured onto him, and he'd just wipe it off. Nope. This stuff heavily poured onto him for at least 45 seconds straight. And it didn't look at all like dog or human waste. This stuff was thick, oozing, brownish-greenish sludge, falling right on his head and ran down his body. And it must have smelled bad, because he was retching the whole time and puked a couple times, and it just didn't stop. By the end he wasn't even recognizable. Even when they released him from the chair, he was trying to wipe it away, but it was all stringy and oozing and smearing everywhere. Man, it looked rough. Perhaps an appropriate punishment after all, and more effective than jail. I'm glad he experienced a fair consequence for his actions. Our English teacher raped half the boys' track team in high school, and slept with the vice principal and the gym teacher. Everybody knew about it, and we were all fairly certain one of the kids was the actual father of her kid, not her husband. When I came home and told my dad that a teacher had been arrested for sleeping with students, he responded, "So they finally caught up with Marcy? 2 of my apprentices have her nudes and keep showing the rest of us when we're trying to work. I don't miss my hometown, lol." I'm from a very small town in Canada. Very quiet, nothing big ever came up, and it was a fairly tight-knit community. One day, an explosion went off in an apartment building. A 23-year-old, single mother, who also happens to be a quadriplegic, was killed instantly. The case was eventually solved. The explosion was a gift-wrapped pipe bomb left by her former financial advisor. He squandered hundreds of thousands of dollars from her, and was convicted for it. He was then released on bail and then left the bomb. I gonna have to go with the woman who killed the 8-month pregnant woman, cut out the baby, and tried to pass it off as hers. Unfortunately, this is more common than one might think. It is called fetal abduction, and the Wikipedia page about it has recorded around 20 cases since 2000, which is at least in my eyes insane. The local drunk got into an argument with another regular at a popular bar, pulled out a gun, and shot the other guy to death. But that's not the scandal. The guy who died was apparently really nice and well liked in the community. The others in the bar were able to disarm and restrain the assailant until the police arrived. When the sheriff got there, he just said, "Looks like you all need a few more minutes with him. I'll come back later." So everyone in the bar grabbed what they could find and ended up beating the shooter to death. The sheriff reported it as self-defense, and the security tapes disappeared. But the bar was crowded, so the real story got out. There were a few attempts to reopen the case or charge the sheriff and some of the bar patrons, but they were all squashed pretty quickly. The really interesting detail, in my opinion, is that there were some pretty strong rumors that the drunk had been sleeping with the wife of the man he killed and that he'd been attacked first. So the original shooting may have been in self-defense. But because there was no camera footage and all the witnesses were involved in killing the drunk, there's no way of knowing the truth. I always like stories like this. 45 people in the bar and not a single witness. I live in a small Russian city named Nalchik. In 2005, we were attacked by terrorists. Mobile groups of terrorists of 5 to 6 people, with a total number of about 200 people, armed with various small arms, including RPG-7 and RPD, enter Nalchik in cars from 2 directions. There are the first shootings between police officers and militants on the outskirts of the city. 14 civilians and 35 police officers and law enforcement agencies were killed. More than 240 people were injured, including 129 law enforcement officers. I was 5 months old then, and the stories of my parents are very surprising because now our city is very quiet and almost nothing happens. My favorite Chinese restaurant burned down when I was in high school. Told the fire department nobody was left in the building. Turns out they had multiple people chained up in the basement as part of a fairly large human trafficking operation. Suburb of Detroit. Fucking crazy. My home county had a few historic covered bridges. They were quite the pride and joy of the area. Somebody burnt one down. Somebody else saw 3 young men do the deed. Now we all knew it was a trio of kids on my class. Like most schools, we had cliques, 2 of which were the preps and the burnouts. The bridge burners were preps. One's dad was the county judge. One's mom was the primary real estate agent in town. This posed a dilemma. So the parents of the preps, including the judge, hatched a little plan. They gave 3 burnouts in my class $10,000 each, mid-1980s, and the promise of a light sentence of 6 months probation if they would plead guilty and take the fall. The burnouts agreed and took their money. The judge figured if the burnouts didn't hold up their end, he would make sure they found guilty anyway. So they showed up in court in front of the preps judge dad. They not only didn't plead guilty, they had a speeding ticket dated the same day and time as the time the bridge burned. But the speeding ticket was for 70 miles away. And since all 3 were minors, all 3 were named in the ticket report. The judge had no choice but to dismiss the case. And the parents of the preps weren't even mad because that was enough of an excuse to effectively end the whole investigation. Nobody got in trouble for it. It all just went away. The bridge was rebuilt, the placard was changed to say, "Replica of a historic bridge," and for $10,000 those precious little boys didn't get a black mark in their records. A drunk guy was operating CPR in the middle of the harbor place and yelling. It triggered passers-by to call in an ambulance for help, until they realized he was reanimating an inflatable boat. What was the biggest scandal in your small town? Leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.